It's just a wheelchair. Someone will buy it." He laughed when he said that. He actually laughed. And those 6 words spoken by a man who thought he had gotten away clean would become the sentence that destroyed his life. Because what Ryan Mercer didn't know that night, standing in the dark with stolen property and zero regret, was that somewhere across town, a 20-year-old girl was waking up to find her entire world had been ripped off her front porch. And the people who were about to hear her story, they don't forgive easily. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The first thing Haley Bennett noticed when she opened her front door that Tuesday morning was the cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you reach for a jacket, the kind that hits your face like a warning, sharp still. The kind of morning where everything feels too quiet, like the world is holding its breath before something bad finishes happening. She noticed the cold, and then she noticed the chain. It was lying on the porch in 2 pieces. The heavy steel links her neighbor Marcus had helped her install after the last time someone had tried to pry open her storage unit. He'd said this thing could stop a truck, and she had believed him. She had slept easier because of it. She had stopped double-checking the lock before bed because of it. Now it was cut clean through, both halves still connected to the railing, the middle gone, like someone had just decided that chain wasn't going to be a problem and dealt with it accordingly. The porch was empty. For 3 full seconds, Haley's brain refused to process what she was seeing. That's how the human mind works sometimes when reality becomes too painful to absorb. All at once, it gives you a few seconds of mercy first. A small gift before the crash. 3 seconds. Then the crash came. "No," she whispered. Just that one word, not a shout, not a scream, just a quiet, devastated no that nobody was around to hear. Because the wheelchair was gone. Not just any wheelchair, not some standard issue hospital chair collecting dust in a corner. This was her chair, custom fitted to the exact measurements of her body after 18 months of waiting, 3 rounds of insurance appeals, and a fundraiser her college friends had organized that still made her tear up when she thought about it. The chair had been built around her, the angle of the seat, the height of the armrests, the weight of the frame, the grip on the wheels. It wasn't a machine she operated. It was an extension of her body. It was the mechanical reason she could leave the house without help. Without it, she couldn't get to class. Without it, she couldn't get to work. Without it, she couldn't move through her own apartment without pulling herself from surface to surface, counting the distance between the counter and the couch like a child learning to walk all over again. Without it, she was trapped. She stood in the doorway holding the frame with both hands, looking at the empty space where her life had been parked, and she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Completely, utterly helpless. She hated that feeling more than anything in the world. Haley Bennett had been fighting that feeling since she was 8 years old. That was the year a driver ran a red light and changed the entire direction of her life in approximately 2 seconds. She didn't remember the impact. She remembered the sound before it, her mother calling her name from the car window, and then she remembered a hospital ceiling. White and fluorescent and endless, and a doctor whose face she still couldn't picture saying words she would spend the next 12 years learning to live with. She would not walk again, not the way she had before. The damage was permanent. The life she had known before that afternoon was finished. She was 8 years old. She cried for 6 months. She refused to leave her room. She told her parents she didn't want to go back to school, didn't want to see her friends, didn't want to exist in a world where everyone could do things she couldn't. She went through a grief so total and so consuming that her therapist told her parents it was completely normal that children who experience sudden disability often mourn the person they expected to become, and that mourning needed space to breathe. So they gave her space. And eventually, slowly, almost accidentally, Haley started fighting back. Not in dramatic ways at first. Small things. Insisting on making her own breakfast, refusing to let her mother carry her bag to school, learning which routes through the building were accessible and which ones weren't, and complaining loudly to the principal about the ones that weren't until something changed. Getting angry, getting organized, getting loud. By the time she was 12, she had convinced her school to install a ramp near the gymnasium that 16 other students ended up using. By 15, she was writing letters to local government about sidewalk accessibility standards. By 18, she had graduated with honors, won a partial academic scholarship, and moved into her own apartment 4 towns away from where she grew up. Her mother had cried at the door. Haley had hugged her and said, "Mom, I've got this." And she had meant it. She had built her life around that belief. That independence was not something handed to her. Not something she was owed, but something she had to architect for herself carefully and deliberately, one decision at a time. The wheelchair was part of that architecture, the most critical part, the part everything else stood on. And now someone had taken it. She went back inside, lowered herself onto her couch, and called 911. The operator was professional and kind. She asked the right questions. She took the report seriously. She told Haley that officers would be dispatched within the hour and that someone would follow up with her directly. Haley said thank you and hung up. Then she sat in the silence of her apartment and did something she never let herself do in front of other people. She put her face in her hands and she cried. Not the kind of crying that releases pressure, the kind that builds it, the desperate grinding kind that comes from knowing that tears won't fix anything, that the world keeps moving, whether you cry or not, that somewhere out there a person who laughed at her situation was walking around free while she was sitting in her apartment, unable to reach the bathroom without help. She cried for 7 minutes. She counted. Then she stopped, picked up her phone again, and called her best friend Jordan. Jordan answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's," Jordan started. "My wheelchair is gone," Haley said. Her voice was flat. "Someone stole it last night." Silence. "Then what?" "Cut the chain, took it off the porch. I found it this morning." "Haley," Jordan's voice dropped. "Oh my God. I need help. I can't." She stopped, took a breath, started again. "I can't get to class. I can't get to work. I literally cannot get out of my apartment without it. I need someone to come here, and I need to figure out what to do." "I'm already putting on my shoes," Jordan said. She arrived in 22 minutes. The police arrived 40 minutes after that. 2 officers, one older, one younger, both professional. They took pictures of the cut chain. They took her statement. They told her they would file the report and that theft of a medical device was a serious charge. They told her to notify her insurance company and to contact the manufacturer to report the serial number. The older officer, whose name was Brennan, crouched down so he was at eye level with where Haley sat on the couch and spoke to her like a human being, which she appreciated. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "I want to be honest with you. We're going to do everything we can, but I also want you to know that recovery rates for stolen mobility equipment they're not great. People break them down and sell the parts because they're harder to trace that way." Haley looked at him. "So you're telling me I'm probably not getting it back?" He didn't flinch. "I'm telling you we're going to try. I'm also telling you to start looking at your options in parallel. Contact your insurance, contact disability services. There are loan programs sometimes for—" "I know about the loan programs," Haley said quietly. "I've called 3 of them. The wait list is 4 to 6 months. The officer nodded slowly. He didn't have an answer for that. Nobody did. After they left, Jordan sat down beside Haley on the couch and took her hand and didn't say anything for a while, which was exactly the right move. Sometimes there are no words that fit the situation, and the people who understand that are worth more than the people who try to fill the silence. Finally, Jordan said, "What do you need?" Haley thought about it. "I need people to know," she said. "Not for sympathy. I don't want people feeling sorry for me. But if this person is trying to sell it, I need people to know what it looks like. Someone might see it." Jordan was already reaching for her phone. "I'll post it right now. Photo from last month, the one at the park." "Wait," Haley caught at her arm. "Not just social media. I want flyers. Real ones, physical ones, in stores and at gas stations and at the repair shops. Places where—" She paused, thinking. Places where someone trying to sell stolen equipment might actually go. Jordan looked at her. "That's smart." "I've had a really bad morning," Haley said. "But I'm still me." The faintest edge of something almost like a smile crossed her face. Then it was gone. They spent the rest of the day making flyers. Haley designed them herself. Clean, readable, impossible to ignore. A photo of the wheelchair, taken on a Saturday afternoon when she and Jordan had gone to the botanical garden, sunlight hitting the wheels at an angle that made the whole thing look almost beautiful. Underneath the photo, in large black letters, "Stolen from disabled college student." Then the description, then the serial number. then a phone number. At the bottom, a single line she almost didn't include because it felt too raw. Please help me get my life back. Jordan printed 300 copies at the campus library. They divided them between 4 people: Jordan Haley's neighbor Marcus, her coworker Dana from the bookstore, and a classmate named Troy who had a car and a good heart and nothing planned for the afternoon. By evening, those flyers were in gas station windows, taped to coffee shop bulletin boards, pinned to laundry room walls, in apartment complexes, stuck in the windows of every auto repair shop within a 12-mile radius. Haley couldn't go with them. She sat in her apartment and waited and told herself not to think about the fact that the person who had taken her wheelchair was out there right now, walking around on both feet, probably not thinking about her at all. She told herself that. It didn't really work. Her phone rang that evening. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway because she was answering every call today. Is this Haley Bennett? A man's voice. Low, a little rough around the edges. Yes, who is this? My name's not important right now. I saw your flyer at the gas station on Mercer Road, the one about the wheelchair. Haley sat up straight. Yes, that's my wheelchair. Do you know something? A pause. Not yet, but I'm going to ask around. Is it okay if I call you if I find something? She was quiet for a second, trying to read the voice. Something about it was unusual, not threatening, but serious in a way that most people weren't serious about things like this. Yes, she said. Please. All right. Another pause. I'm sorry this happened to you. The call ended. She stared at the phone for a moment. Jordan was in the kitchen making coffee. She called out, "Who was that?" I don't know, Haley said, and she genuinely didn't. Not yet. She didn't know that the man who had just called her was named Jake Morrison, and that he had been standing at the train station on Mercer Road reading her flyer for a long time before he called. She didn't know that he had read the words, "Please help me get my life back," and felt something shift in his chest. She didn't know that he had pulled out his phone before he was even done reading, because some things don't require deliberation. She didn't know any of that. All she knew was that someone had called, and for the first time since she had opened her front door that morning and found 2 pieces of a chain and an empty porch, she felt something other than helpless. She felt like maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't going to let this stand. She was right about that. But before the help came, things got worse, because they always do first. 2 days after the theft, Haley's insurance company called her back with a decision. She had been told by the intake representative at buy-in that her claim was strong, that custom medical equipment theft was clearly covered under her policy, and that the review team would move quickly given the circumstances. The review team had moved quickly. Too quickly, it turned out. Ms. Bennett, the agent said, I'm calling to let you know that after reviewing your claim, we're unable to provide coverage for replacement at this time. Haley felt the floor drop out from under her. I'm sorry, what? Your current policy does have coverage for medical equipment, the agent said, reading from a script she could tell, but the provision for replacement requires the item to be fully unrecoverable. Since there is an active police report and the item has not been officially declared unrecoverable, it's been stolen, Haley said, her voice rising. Someone cut the chain and took it off my porch. How is that not? I understand your frustration, the agent said in the tone of someone who very clearly did not. But our policy requires a 30-day window following a theft report before we can begin the replacement process. This allows time for law enforcement to... 30 days, Haley repeated. Yes, ma'am. You're telling me I need to wait 30 days. Under the terms of your policy, I cannot leave my apartment, Haley said. The words came out very slowly and very clearly because she needed this person to understand. I cannot get to school. I cannot get to work. I literally cannot function without that equipment. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is not an inconvenience. This is my ability to exist in the world. Silence on the other end. Then in a slightly softer but still entirely scripted voice, I understand, and I'm so sorry for the difficulty this is causing. If you'd like, I can connect you to our advocacy line where a representative can... Haley hung up. She set her phone face down on the coffee table. She sat there for a long time without moving. Jordan, who had been staying with her since the theft, sleeping on the couch, rearranging her own schedule, doing quiet and extraordinary things like making sure Haley had everything she needed before she asked for it, came out of the bathroom and looked at Haley's face and didn't even bother asking what happened. She just sat down on the couch beside her and said, "We're going to fix this." Jordan. "I know," Jordan said. "I know, but I need you to hear me say it." Haley looked at her best friend, the girl who had shown up in 22 minutes, who had printed 300 flyers, who was sleeping on a couch because she refused to leave Haley alone in this. "Okay," Haley said. "We're going to fix it," Jordan said again. Neither of them knew how, but sometimes the promise matters more than the plan. That night, Haley started making calls, not just to insurance reps and disability organizations, though she called those too. She started reaching out to local news stations because Jordan had suggested it, and it was a good idea, and Haley was practical enough to know that shame was a powerful tool when applied correctly. A news story meant visibility. Visibility meant pressure. Pressure meant someone somewhere might know something. The local news did a brief segment, 37 seconds on the Tuesday evening broadcast. A reporter read the story with appropriate sympathy, showed the flyer photo, gave the tip line number. Haley watched it in her apartment and thought 37 seconds isn't much, but it's something. It was something. Because that segment aired at 6:14 p.m. on Tuesday. And by 7:30 p.m., Haley's phone had received 41 calls and her voicemail was full. Most of them were people expressing support, offering prayers, saying they were sorry. A few offered money, which she hadn't asked for but was moved by. One woman called to say her daughter also used a wheelchair and she had cried watching the segment, and she hoped the person responsible faced real consequences. One call was different. A man's voice. Not the same voice as before. Older, measured, a voice that sounded like it was used to being listened to. "Ms. Bennett, my name is Cole Harrison. I saw your story on the news. I believe a friend of mine may have spoken with you earlier this week." Haley straightened. "The call from the gas station." "That's right. Jake mentioned your situation to me. We'd like to help if you'll allow us." "Help how?" she asked carefully. "We have resources," Cole said. "People who know people, connections in places where stolen equipment tends to move. We're not law enforcement, so we can't make any promises about what we'll find. But we're good at finding things." Haley was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Harrison, who exactly are you?" A brief pause. Then, "We're the Hells Angels, Ms. Bennett, and what happened to you is the kind of thing we don't ignore." If Haley had been expecting a lot of things from this phone call, she had not been expecting that. She looked across the room at Jordan, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a textbook open and earbuds and completely unaware that the conversation happening 6 feet away was about to change everything. "Okay," Haley said. Cole Harrison's voice remained steady, calm, almost businesslike. "We'll be in touch." That night, Haley lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about the flyer. The 37-second news segment, the insurance agent, and the 30-day waiting period. The phone call from a gas station from a man who said his name wasn't important but called anyway. The second call from a man who ran a motorcycle club that most people crossed the street to avoid. She thought about what it meant that the people who had responded most directly, most practically, most immediately to what happened to her weren't the institutions designed to help people in her situation. They weren't the insurance company or the disability advocacy organizations or the police department, all of whom were doing what they could within systems that moved like glaciers. They were individuals. Strangers who saw a flyer at a gas station. Strangers who watched 37 seconds of local news and picked up the phone. She had always believed in the inherent decency of ordinary people. She had built her whole life on that belief in a way, the idea that if you kept showing up, kept refusing to disappear, kept insisting on your place in the world, people would eventually see you. Tonight, lying in the dark, she let herself believe it a little harder. Somewhere out there, people were looking for her wheelchair. And Ryan Mercer, laughing somewhere in the dark with his easy money and his easy conscience, had no idea what was coming for him. He had picked the wrong target, not because Haley was dangerous, but because the people who loved and respected and fought for people like Haley, the ones who read flyers and answered news segments and made phone calls from gas stations, those people, they were. Jake Morrison had not planned on stopping at the gas station on Mercer Road that night. He had planned on going straight home. It had been a long day, the kind of day where your back aches before noon and your patience runs out sometime around 3, and by evening, all you want is to be somewhere quiet with something cold to drink. He was running low on fuel, which was the only reason he pulled in. 2 minutes, he figured, maybe 3. Fill the tank, get back on the road. He was at the pump when he noticed the flyer. It was taped to the glass door of the station at eye level, which meant whoever had put it there wanted it to be seen. He almost didn't read it. He had walked past 100 flyers in his life without reading them. Lost dogs, missing persons, garage sales, community meetings. The brain learns to filter that kind of thing out after a while. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the photo. The wheelchair sitting in sunlight taken on what looked like a good day for the person sitting in it. Maybe it was the simplicity of it, no dramatic language, no excessive pleading, just a clean, direct ask. He read the words at the bottom last. Please help me get my life back. He stood there at the town station door for longer than he would ever admit to anyone. He read the whole thing twice. The description of the chair, the serial number, the phone number, the name Haley Bennett. He didn't know a Haley Bennett. He had never met her and had no particular reason to care about what happened to a stranger. But he read those words a second time. Please help me get my life back. And something that had been quiet inside Jake Morrison for a long time woke up. He pulled out his phone and dialed before he'd made a conscious decision to do it. That was the honest truth. He didn't think it through, didn't weigh the time commitment, did not ask himself whether this was really his problem. He just called, because the alternative was walking away from that door and getting back on his motorcycle and knowing for the rest of the night that he had seen something and done nothing. Jake Morrison was many things. He was not that. The call went through. A young woman answered, and her voice was careful and controlled in the way that voices are when someone has been working very hard all day not to fall apart. He told her his name didn't matter. He told her he'd seen the flyer. He told her he was going to ask around. She said yes. She said please. He hung up and stood there in the cold for another moment, then got back on his bike and drove not home, but to a building on the east side of the city where a group of men he had known for the better part of 20 years would be gathered around a table the way they usually were on Tuesday nights, and he thought about what he was going to say. He didn't need to think about it long. Cole Harrison was already seated when Jake walked in. Cole was the kind of man who was always already seated. He had that quality about him, a permanent gravity, like he arrived before everyone else, because the room needed him there first to make sense. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been through enough that it had stopped being capable of surprise. He looked up when Jake came through the door. You look like something's on your mind, Cole said. Jake put the photo on the table. He had taken a picture of the flyer on his phone and printed it at the shop before he came over. He'd planned that much on the drive. He set it down in front of Cole and didn't say anything because Cole Harrison read things carefully and didn't appreciate being rushed. Cole read it. The table had 6 other men around it. One by one, they stopped their conversations and looked at what Cole was reading. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Cole set the paper down flat on the table and looked at Jake. When did this happen? Few days ago. She's been on the news tonight. 30-something seconds on Channel 4. Cole looked around the table, not asking a question, taking a reading, seeing what was in the room. What was in the room was quiet. The kind of quiet that means everyone already knows what's being decided and is simply waiting for it to be said out loud. She's 20 years old, Jake said. Can't get to school, can't get to work. Insurance company told her to wait 30 days before they'll even start a replacement claim. He paused. 30 days. Someone at the end of the table, a man named Dex, who almost never spoke first, said, "That's garbage." "Yeah," Jake said. Cole picked up the paper again. He looked at the photo of the wheelchair in the sunlight. He looked at the line at the bottom. "Please help me get my life back." "This isn't about a wheelchair," Cole said quietly. Nobody disagreed. "This is about someone deciding that a young woman couldn't defend herself, so she was an easy target." He set the paper down again. They thought no one was going to come after them. He looked around the table one more time. Let's show them they were wrong about that. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no applause, no chest thumping, no raised voices. It was just 7 men around a table reaching a quiet consensus about something that mattered. That was how it usually worked. The things worth doing rarely announced themselves with fanfare. They arrived plainly and the right people recognized them. Cole called Haley that same night. He identified himself plainly, no games, no mystery. He told her who they were. He told her what they could offer. He heard the pause on her end of the line. He understood the pause. He'd been on the receiving end of that pause his entire adult life, The moment when a person was weighing what they thought they knew against what was actually in front of them. He didn't rush her. He had learned a long time ago that trust wasn't something you could push people into. It had to be chosen. She chose it. Okay, she said. That was all. One word. But Cole had been doing this long enough to hear everything behind it. The exhaustion, the determination, the faint, fragile edge of something that might grow back into hope if someone handled it carefully. He told her they'd be in touch and hung up. Then he looked at Jake. All right, he said. Let's find this thing. What happened next was not the kind of investigation you see in movies. There were no car chases, no confrontations in dark alleys. It was methodical and quiet, and it moved through networks that most people didn't know existed. The informal economy of mechanics and shop owners and parts dealers who heard things, who saw things, who knew things, but had no particular reason to share them with police. Jake worked the phones. He had been a mechanic for 30 years, and he knew every shop in a 40-mile radius the way a librarian knows her shelves. He started calling, not asking about a stolen wheelchair directly that was too obvious, too easy to deny. He asked about unusual parts, specialized frames, custom components, the kind of specialized equipment that didn't show up on the legitimate market very often and would be very noticeable to someone who knew what they were looking at. He made 14 calls the first day. On the 12th, he got something. A shop owner named Gerald who ran a salvage and repair operation 2 counties over and who owed Jake a favor from about 5 years back involving a water pump and a very bad winter, said he'd seen something a few days ago that he hadn't known what to make of. Guy came in, Gerald said. Wanted to know what the frame was worth. High-grade aluminum medical-grade fittings. I told him I didn't deal in medical equipment, and he said it was just parts that he'd taken it off a discarded chair. Something about the way he said it. Gerald paused. I didn't ask more questions. Probably should have. Did he leave a name? Jake asked. No, but he paid cash for a storage unit out back. Rented it for a week. Jake was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Gerald, he said, I'm going to need the address. He called Cole immediately after he hung up. Cole listened without interrupting, which was one of his best qualities. Don't go in there alone, Cole said when Jake finished. I wasn't planning to. And we call Brennan first. Brennan was the police officer who had taken Haley's report. Cole had gotten his number from Haley 2 days ago asking her permission first. He believed in working with law enforcement when he could and in not complicating things unnecessarily. Whatever's in that storage unit, we do this clean, no shortcuts. Agreed, Jake said. Cole called Officer Brennan. Now Brennan had been a cop for 22 years. He had received a lot of calls in that time, tips, leads, rumors, anonymous hunches that went nowhere and wasted days. He had learned to be carefully skeptical of all of them because false hope was a particular kind of cruelty, and he had seen it do damage to families that never quite healed. When Cole Harrison's name came up on his screen, he almost didn't answer. He answered. Cole was direct and specific. No speculation, no exaggeration. He told Brennan what Jake had found, where the storage unit was what Gerald had reported. He gave him everything he had, which wasn't much but was enough. Brennan was quiet for a moment. How reliable is your source on this? Reliable enough that I'm calling you instead of handling it myself, Cole said, which was not the kind of answer a cop was technically supposed to be satisfied with. But Brennan was also smart enough to understand exactly what was being communicated. I'll look into it, Brennan said. I'd appreciate it if you did it today. Another pause. Mr. Harrison, why are you doing this? You don't know this girl. Cole thought about the flyer on Jake's table. He thought about the photo of the wheelchair in the sunlight. He thought about the line at the bottom that Jake had read standing at a gas station door. No, he said, I don't. But she asked for help, and we were in a position to give it. Brennan said he'd be in touch, and he was. 3 hours later, he called Cole back. His voice was different, tighter, more focused. The sound of a man who had just confirmed something that changed the shape of the situation. We found the unit, Brennan said. Cole waited. There's equipment in there, custom frame, parts. We need her to come in and identify it, but I think we found it. Cole closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them and said, Is it intact? Brennan hesitated, and Cole had been around long enough to know that a hesitation like that meant the answer was not the answer you wanted. Some of it, Brennan said carefully. The chair's been disassembled. We don't know the full extent yet, But there's enough there too, he stopped. There's a sticker on one of the armrests. A sunflower. Painted on, not printed. Cole didn't say anything. I'm going to take a wild guess. Brennan said that sticker is going to mean something to her. Yeah, Cole said quietly. Yeah, it will. Cole called Haley next. It was the call he had been both waiting to make and not quite ready for, because he had been in enough situations to know that the moment of near resolution was also the moment of maximum fragility, the point where hope was close enough to touch, but the details weren't confirmed yet, and the gap between the two was where people got hurt. Jordan answered. Of course Jordan answered. Cole had spoken to Jordan several times over the past few days and had developed a deep and uncomplicated respect for her. She was fiercely protective without being obstructive. She asked smart questions. She made sure Haley was okay before she handed over the phone. Haley, Cole said when she came on, we think we found it. The silence that followed was not the hesitant kind. It was the shocked kind. The kind that happens when your body absorbs something before your brain catches up with it. You think, she finally said. The police are at the location now. They need you to come in and identify some items. There's damage, I want you to know that up front. I don't have the full picture yet, but there's a sunflower sticker on one of the armrests. He heard her breath catch. Just barely. Just enough. Jordan painted that, Haley said. Her voice was very quiet. I figured, Cole said. Another pause. Then, you actually found it. We got lucky, Cole said, which was partially true and partially Cole Harrison being modest, which was a habit so ingrained in him he barely noticed it anymore. No, Haley said. No, you didn't just get lucky. And there was something in her voice that Cole didn't have a word for, exactly not gratitude, though gratitude was part of it. Something older, something that sounded like a person reclaiming something they had been told they couldn't have. Can you get to the precinct? He asked. Jordan will take me, she said immediately, as soon as possible. We're leaving right now. She arrived at the precinct 40 minutes later, Jordan driving Haley in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and her jaw set. Officer Brennan met them at the door. He walked them through the process calmly and carefully, what they'd found, what the conditions were, what identification would be needed. Then he led them to where the parts had been laid out and photographed. Haley went through each piece methodically. She knew this equipment the way you know your own body, every component, every detail. She confirmed the serial numbers. She confirmed the frame measurements. She confirmed 3 separate custom modifications that her physical therapist had specified during the fitting process, modifications so specific that no other chair in the country would have them. Then she saw the armrest. The sunflower was smaller than she remembered. Jordan had painted it on a Saturday afternoon 6 months ago, sitting at Haley's kitchen table with a tiny brush in 3 shades of yellow, and more patience than the project probably required. Haley had told her it was too small to be worth the effort. Jordan had told her to be quiet and let her concentrate. It was faded now, scratched. Someone had clearly made an attempt to scrape it off and failed because Jordan had sealed it with 2 coats of clear varnish and told Haley it would outlast both of them. She had been right. Haley touched the edge of the sunflower with the tip of one finger. She didn't say anything for a long time. Brennan stood to one side. Jordan stood slightly behind Haley. Nobody spoke because nobody needed to. Finally, Haley looked up at Brennan and said in a voice that was completely steady, "That's mine." Ryan Mercer was arrested the following morning. Cole had heard this from Brennan in a brief call that lasted approximately 90 seconds. Cole thanked him. Brennan told him they were doing their job. Cole said that was true, but that some people did their jobs better than others, which Brennan accepted without arguing. The arrest itself was not dramatic. These things rarely are. A man named Ryan Mercer, 33 years old, 2 prior offenses, petty theft and fraud, was picked up at his apartment at 7:14 in the morning. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He told the arresting officers he hadn't known the chair was such a big deal. He said this while being handcuffed in his own doorway. It was just a wheelchair, he said. I figured someone would buy it for parts. The officer taking him in didn't respond to that. He was experienced enough to know that some statements were best preserved exactly as spoken because they would matter later. When Cole told Jake about the arrest, Jake was quiet for a second. He said it was just a wheelchair, Jake repeated. That's what they said, he said. Jake made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He has no idea. No, Cole agreed, he doesn't. What Ryan Mercer didn't know, what he couldn't know standing in his doorway at 7:14 in the morning, this with no real understanding of the chain of events his decision had set in motion, was that the story wasn't over. The arrest was not the resolution. The arrest was simply the moment when the law caught up with what had already happened, which was that a community had decided his actions were unacceptable and had done something about it. He didn't know about the flyer at the gas station. He didn't know about Jake's phone calls or Gerald's storage unit or Cole Harrison sitting at a table with 6 men and making a quiet decision. He didn't know about Brennan driving out to a building 2 counties over and finding a sunflower on a scratched armrest. He didn't know about any of it. He thought he had picked an easy target. He was about to understand how wrong that was. Back at Haley's apartment, Jordan was making tea, which was what she did when she was processing something, the physical ritual of it giving her somewhere to put the energy, and Haley was on the phone with her mother. Her mother, Susan Bennett, had been calling every day since the theft. Every single day, sometimes twice. She lived 4 towns away and had spent the past week in a barely controlled panic that she was trying very hard not to transmit through the phone because she knew her daughter and she knew that Haley needed her to be steady right now, not frightened. But now she didn't have to be steady about the frightening part. They found it, Haley said. On the other end of the line, Susan Bennett made a sound that was not words. Then she composed herself. Then she said, "Who found it? The police." The police made the arrest, but the thing that got them to the right place that came from somewhere else. What do you mean? Haley thought about how to explain Jake Morrison standing at a gas station reading a flyer. About Cole Harrison putting that piece of paper on a table and looking around the room. About men with tattoos and leather vests who heard about a 20-year-old woman trapped in her apartment and decided that was not something they were going to ignore. "Mom," she said, "you know how I've always said that people are basically decent." "Yes." Her mother's voice was cautious. "You've said it about 12,000 times, right?" "I was right." A pause. "I was so right." Susan Bennett laughed at that. It was a watery, overwhelmed laugh, but it was real. "Who helped you, Haley?" "People who weren't supposed to, according to a lot of people anyway." There was a lot more to explain after that, and she explained it. All of it. The phone call from Jake, the call from Cole, the quiet investigation that had happened in parallel with the official one, moving through channels the official one couldn't access faster than anyone expected. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Haley finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. "I want to send them something," she said. "Flowers, a card, something." Haley smiled. "I'll ask if that's okay." "It better be okay." Susan's voice had that particular firmness that Haley had grown up with, the tone that said this was not a debate. People who do something like that deserve to know it was appreciated. "Yeah," Haley said, "they do." But there was still a problem. The chair had been found. Ryan Mercer had been arrested. Those were both true and both important. But the chair was still in pieces. It had been disassembled and damaged, and getting it back wasn't as simple as having it returned. It needed to be reassembled, evaluated, repaired. The custom components needed to be assessed by someone who actually knew what they were looking at. And the reality of that process, the time it would take, the cost it would involve, was something Haley had not yet fully reckoned with. She brought it up with Jordan that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with tea that had gone cold. "The insurance still won't move faster," Haley said. "Even with the arrest, the policy language is the policy language. The 30-day window doesn't care that they found the chair." Jordan wrapped both hands around her mug. "What does repair cost?" "I called around today. To get it back to full function, the frame's been bent in at least 2 places. 2 of the custom components are cracked. We're looking at somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000. Jordan was quiet. "I can't." Haley stopped. She took a breath. "I have $300 in my checking account, Jordan. I have been missing work for a week and a half. I can't." "There has to be a way," Jordan said. "I know there has to be a way. I just don't know what it is yet." She would know what it was within 24 hours. She just didn't know that yet. Cole Harrison had learned about the repair issue through Brennan, who had learned it from the property log. The assessment done when the chair came into evidence indicated significant damage. And Brennan had thought to mention this to Cole because he had developed over the past week an intuitive understanding that Cole Harrison and his people were not quite done being useful. Cole brought it to Jake. Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I know someone. Frank Dalton ran a medical equipment service and repair shop that had been operating out of the same location for 19 years. He was meticulous, knowledgeable, and deeply private in the way that people who are very good at specific technical things sometimes are. Jake had sent him work twice over the years, not wheelchairs specifically, but complex adaptive equipment that required the kind of careful attention most shops didn't want to give. Jake called him. Frank answered, and Jake explained the situation without excess detail. He described the chair and what had happened to it. He described Haley. He mentioned the arrest. He said the chair needed someone who knew what they were doing. Frank listened. When Jake finished, he didn't immediately respond, and the pause went on long enough that Jake thought the call might have dropped. Then Frank said something Jake wasn't expecting. How old is she? 20, Jake said. Another pause. My daughter is 22, Frank said. She's been in a chair since she was 16. I know what this is. Jake let that sit. Bring me the parts, Frank said. I'll take a look before I say anything about cost. Frank, bring me the parts, Jake. Cole arranged for the equipment to be transferred from evidence once the documentation was complete. Brennan, who had become quietly and unexpectedly central to this entire situation, expedited what he could. The parts arrived at Frank's shop on a Thursday afternoon. Frank worked alone the way he always did when something mattered. He worked for 3 hours before he called Jake. The frame can be straightened, he said without preamble. 2 of the custom components need replacement. I'm going to have to source them from the original manufacturer, which takes about a week. The wheel assembly is actually fine. Whoever took it apart knew not to force the bearings, which tells me they were looking for resale value, not destruction. A pause. The armrest with the sunflower, that's cosmetic damage only. I can stabilize the paint without refinishing. Can you fix it? Jake asked. Yes. What will it cost her? Frank was quiet. Jake, he said. Frank, don't insult me by letting her pay for this. Jake was quiet for a moment. You don't have to. My daughter's name is Ellie, Frank said. Her chair was damaged 2 years ago in a minor accident. Nothing dramatic. She was only without it for 4 days while it was in the shop. 4 days. He paused again. She cried every one of those 4 days. And she was 20 years old, and she had both her parents in the house and every resource she needed, and she still cried every day. His voice was level, but underneath it was something that had clearly been living there for 2 years. This girl was alone, so this girl was dealing with insurance companies in waiting periods, and she did it by herself for a week and a half. If I charge her for this, I'll never forgive myself. Jake said nothing. Tell her the repair is covered, Frank said. Tell her it'll be ready in 8 days. After he hung up, Jake sat for a while without moving. Then he called Cole. Cole listened to everything Jake told him about Frank and about Ellie and about the 4 days and what Frank had said at the end. When Jake finished, Cole said, call her. You should call her, Jake said. You're better at this than I am. You found the flyer, Cole said. This one's yours. So Jake called Haley. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting. He didn't make her wait any longer. The repair is going to be handled, he said. There's a man named Frank Dalton who works on this type of equipment. He's looked at the parts and he says it can be fully restored. It'll take about 8 days. Silence. Jake, Haley said carefully, what does that mean, handled? It means it's not going to cost you anything. The silence this time was different, longer. He could hear her breathing. Why, she finally said. Why would he? He has a daughter, Jake said. She uses a wheelchair. He said he knows what this is. He heard something shift on the other end of the line. Not crying Haley Bennett, he had gathered, did not cry easily on the phone. But something, a release of pressure that had been building for a week and a half. I don't know how to, she started. You don't have to say anything, Jake said. He's not doing it for thanks. None of us are. Then why, she asked. And it was a genuine question, not rhetorical, not performative. She actually wanted to understand. Why are you all doing this? You didn't know me. You had no reason to. Haley. He said her name quietly and she stopped. You put up a flyer that said, please help me get my life back. and some of us who saw that we're in a position to help. That's all it is. She was quiet for a moment. That's not all it is, she said. Jake didn't argue. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was about the code they live by, or the particular fury that rises in men who have spent their lives being judged for their appearance when they see someone genuinely vulnerable being preyed upon. Maybe it was about Jake's 30 years of fixing things and the deep satisfaction of finding something broken and making it right. Maybe it was about Frank and Ellie and 4 days and what they cost a person. Maybe it was all of those things together, layered and complicated the way real motivations usually are. But the reason he gave her was also true. She needed help. They could give it. So they did. 8 days, Jake said. Okay, she said. Her voice was quiet and certain, and something close to whole. We'll be in touch, he said. After the call ended, Haley set her phone down on the table and looked at Jordan, who had been sitting across from her, pretending to read Waiting. 8 days, Haley said. Jordan closed her book. It's going to be fixed. Fully restored. Covered. 8 days. Jordan stared at her. By who? By people, Haley said, who didn't have to. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. And then for the first time in 11 days, Haley Bennett laughed. It was short and a little surprised and completely real, the laugh of someone who had just remembered that the world, for all its capacity to disappoint, also had this. Also had people who stopped at gas stations and read flyers and made phone calls. Also had men around tables who looked at a piece of paper and saw a person and decided that mattered. Also had Frank Dalton and his daughter Ellie, and 4 days that cost enough to make a man give his work away. Also had this. Ryan Mercer was in a holding cell. The chair was in a shop. 8 days stood between Haley and her life. But she had forgotten somewhere in the worst of it that she had never been completely alone in this. She remembered now. Ryan Mercer had a system. It wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't the kind of system that required planning or intelligence or any particular skill beyond a willingness to take things that didn't belong to him. But it had worked reliably, consistently for the better part of 3 years. And that track record had given Ryan something that was far more dangerous than confidence. It had given him certainty. He was certain the game was rigged in his favor, certain that the people he targeted were too weak, too isolated, too caught up in their own struggles to mount any meaningful resistance. Certain that by the time anyone figured out what had happened, he would be 3 steps ahead and untraceable, and the whole thing would fade the way these things always faded into a police report nobody followed up on, in a memory that hurt less over time. That was the system. It had never failed him before. He thought about this sometimes, not with guilt, but with a kind of flat, practical satisfaction. He had assessed the risks, made the calculations, and consistently come out ahead. That was what he told himself, that he was good at reading situations, that he understood people better than most. He understood that the girl with the wheelchair lived alone. He understood that her building had minimal external lighting. He understood that her chair sat on an exposed porch, and that the chain securing it, while heavy, was only as good as the anchor point it was attached to. And the anchor point was a decorative railing bolt that came out of the wood with one firm tug after the chain had been cut. He had assessed all of that in approximately 4 minutes on a Tuesday night. He had been wrong about exactly one thing. He had been wrong about who was paying attention. In the holding cell, Ryan wasn't thinking about any of this yet. He was thinking about his lawyer, a public defender named Kessler, who had represented him twice before, and who Ryan considered reliable in the specific sense that Kessler would show up and say the right procedural things even if he couldn't actually fix anything. He was thinking about the charged theft of medical equipment, which carried a significantly heavier penalty than standard property theft, something Kessler had told him on the phone with a flatness that suggested he was not entirely surprised. He was thinking about his girlfriend, Mara, who had not answered any of his calls, which he told himself was because she was at work and not because she had heard about the arrest and decided not to be involved. He was not thinking about Haley Bennett. He had not thought about Haley Bennett once since the night he had taken her wheelchair. That was how it worked for Ryan. Once something was done, it was behind him. He didn't linger on the people involved. They weren't really people to him in that moment, more like variables in a calculation. The chair had been an opportunity. He had taken the opportunity. The person attached to the opportunity was not something he spent energy on. That would change, but not yet. The morning after his arrest, Ryan was transferred from holding to a processing room to meet with Kessler, who arrived carrying a folder, and the particular expression of a man who had done this too many times to be surprised by anything, but had not done it so many times that he had lost his ability to be tired. They have the chair, Kessler said, sitting down across from Ryan. Parts of it anyway. They have security footage from a building adjacent to the victim's complex showing a figure matching your description within the time frame of the theft. They have a witness who saw you at a repair shop in Caldwell County who matched your description and was asking about prices for custom aluminum frame components. They have a storage unit rented in cash that contains those components. He set the folder on the table. Ryan, they have a lot. Ryan leaned back. The footage is going to be garbage. Middle of the night, no good lighting. It's not garbage, Kessler said. It's not perfect, but it's not garbage. He paused. Also, the storage unit, they found it because someone tracked the lead to the shop in Caldwell County. Someone who was not the police. Ryan frowned. According to what they've told me in Discovery Prep, the tip that led to the storage unit came from a private source, not law enforcement. Kessler looked at him steadily. Someone was looking for this chair independently of the police investigation. Someone with a network that reached into the right places. Ryan stared at him. Who? He said. Kessler picked up his pen. Does the name Cole Harrison mean anything to you? The name didn't mean anything to Ryan, but the silence that followed Kessler watching him waiting carried a weight that Ryan couldn't quite interpret yet, like a sentence where the most important word was still coming. Should it? Ryan said. Kessler tapped the pen against the folder twice. Let's focus on what we can actually manage here, he said. The DA's office is treating this as a high-profile case. The victim's story has been on the news. There's community interest, and the circumstances, the nature of the equipment, the impact on the victim's daily life are going to make this emotionally compelling at trial. I want you to understand what we're dealing with. You're saying it's bad, Ryan said. I'm saying you should understand what your decision cost someone, Kessler said. And there was something different in his voice when he said it, not scripted, not procedural. I've been doing this for 16 years, Ryan. I've represented people who did things that were a lot worse than this. But I want you to hear me on this specific thing. He looked directly at him. This young woman was 20 years old. She had one piece of equipment that made her independent. Without it, she couldn't go to class. She couldn't go to work. She was trapped in her apartment for nearly 2 weeks while you had it in a storage unit. He paused. When you took that chair, you weren't stealing property. You were taking someone's ability to exist in the world. Ryan opened his mouth. Kessler raised his hand. I'm not saying this as your conscience. I'm saying this as your lawyer, because at some point you're going to be in a room with this person and you're going to need to understand what you did in order to say anything that a judge or a jury is going to find credible. Ryan closed his mouth. He sat with that for a moment. She can walk, he said. Kessler looked at him with an expression that was very controlled. No, he said, she cannot walk. The wheelchair is how she moves through the world. That was the point. Ryan said nothing. Something was shifting somewhere underneath the defensive certainty he had been walking around with. Not guilt exactly, not yet, not in a form he would have recognized. But something, a fissure, a small and uncomfortable cracking in the version of the situation he had been carrying. He didn't like it. He pushed it away and told Kessler he wanted to know about the footage. But it came back. Later that day, alone in his cell, it came back. He thought about a 20-year-old woman opening her front door. He thought about what she must have seen. He thought for the first time actually thought about what it meant for her specifically. Not as an abstract, not as a variable, as a person. A 20-year-old person who had built a life around one piece of equipment and come out one morning to find it gone. He didn't enjoy that thought. He pushed it away again. But it kept coming back. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Frank Dalton was 3 days into the repair and making progress that was both slower and more careful than he had originally estimated, which was not unusual for this kind of work. The more he got into it, the more he understood the original design, the specific intentions behind each customization, the relationship between the frame geometry and the seating angle, the way everything had been built around one particular body and its particular needs. It was precise work. It deserved precision. His daughter Ellie called him on the third day. She called most days, which Frank appreciated more than he ever said out loud. She lived 40 minutes away with 2 roommates and a service dog named Biscuit, who had destroyed approximately 4 couch cushions in the past year and whom Frank loved unreasonably. Dad, she said when he answered. Are you in the shop? Where else would I be? It's 7:30 at night. I know what time it is, Ellie. What are you working on? She asked. You sound, she paused. You sound like you do when something matters. Frank looked at the parts spread out in front of him. The frame straightened now, but still bearing the stress marks of where it had been bent. The custom lateral support that had cracked and that he had sourced a replacement for overnight at his own cost. The armrest with the sunflower that he had cleaned carefully and stabilized the paint no longer flaking. There's a girl, he said, 20 years old. Someone stole her chair. Silence on Ellie's end. Stole it, she said quietly. Cut the chain off her porch and took it. She was without it for almost 2 weeks. He heard Ellie's breath change. He knew that breath. He had heard it 4 days in a row, 2 years ago, coming from behind a closed bedroom door. Is she okay? Ellie asked. She's managing, Frank said. The way people manage when they don't have a choice. What's her name? Haley, a pause. How's the chair? It was in rough shape, Frank said. Better now. I've got maybe 5-6 more days. Are you charging her? Frank didn't answer immediately. Dad, Ellie said. No, he said. Another pause. Then Ellie said very quietly, good. They didn't talk about it. More than that, they didn't need to. Frank and Ellie had a language for this kind of thing that didn't require a lot of words built over years of hospital waiting rooms and equipment assessments, and 4 days that had cost them both more than they had expected. Some experiences leave a shared vocabulary that works without translation. After he hung up, Frank went back to work. He worked until 11 o'clock. He would do the same the next day and the day after that. When the story broke more widely, not just the 37 seconds on Channel 4, but a longer piece that a local journalist named Patricia Owens had been developing since the initial broadcast, it changed the temperature of everything. Patricia Owens had been covering local news for 11 years, and she had a particular instinct for the stories that mattered beyond the immediate facts, the ones that were about something larger than what had happened to a specific person on a specific night. She had seen Haley's segment, and she had made calls, and what she found over the course of 3 days of reporting was a story that had layers she hadn't expected. She called Cole Harrison. Cole took the call, which surprised her. She had anticipated more resistance. Instead, he was direct and measured and gave her exactly what he was willing to give, no more, which turned out to be enough. Why did you get involved? She asked. Someone needed help, he said. We were in a position to give it. But you're talking about an organization with a significant public perception problem. A lot of people hear the name and have a very specific reaction. I know they do, Cole said, and that doesn't concern you. In the context of this story becoming public, Ms. Owens, Cole said, we didn't do this to manage our reputation. We did it because a 20-year-old woman asked for help and the system that was supposed to help her was moving too slowly. What people think of us after is their business. Patricia Owens wrote that down verbatim. She used it in the piece. The article ran on a Thursday morning and was shared 47,000 times by noon. Haley read it at Jordan's kitchen table, which had become a kind of command center over the past weeks, the place where phone calls happened, where decisions got made, where Jordan kept a running list of things still to be handled. She read the whole piece twice. When she finished the second time, she put her phone down and said nothing for a long time. What are you thinking? Jordan asked. I'm thinking about the part where Patricia quoted Ryan, Haley said. Jordan frowned. She quoted him. His arresting officer quoted him, what he said when they cuffed him. She picked the phone back up and found the line. She read it aloud, not with anger, but with the careful deliberateness of someone who wanted to understand exactly what they were dealing with. It was just a wheelchair. I figured someone would buy it for parts. Jordan was quiet. He didn't know, Haley said. He actually didn't know what it was, what it meant. She set the phone down again. That might be the most disturbing part. How is that more disturbing than someone who knows and doesn't care? Jordan asked. Because if he knew and didn't care, that's cruelty. That's a person who sees someone's dependency and actively decides to exploit it. That's a defined thing. You can name it. Haley looked at the table. But this is different. This is someone who looked at the thing that makes my life possible and saw a thing. Not a chair, not even a theft. Just parts. Just an object that happened to be in a place where he could reach it. Jordan let her talk. He didn't see me, Haley said. I wasn't even in his calculation. And that's... She stopped. That's a different kind of problem. She thought about this for the rest of the morning. She was still thinking about it when her phone rang, and it was Brennan. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "I wanted to let you know that the DA's office is moving forward with charges. Theft of adaptive medical equipment, which is enhanced under state law because of the disability component. He's looking at real time if convicted." "I know," Haley said. "Patricia Owens called me this morning." "Right." A pause. "There's something else. The DA has asked whether you would be willing to make a statement at arraignment. Not required, this is completely your choice. But given the public attention on the case, they feel it could be." "Yes," Haley said. Brennan paused. "You don't need to decide right now." "Yes," she said again. "I'll make a statement." Another pause. "Okay, I'll let them know." He hesitated one more second. "Ms. Bennett, I want you to know that what you did, getting the flyers out, keeping people informed, staying visible, it's part of why we found the chair as fast as we did. That was you, not just the help you got." Haley was quiet. "Thank you," she said. "Thank the people who read the flyer," he said. "I'm just doing my job." She smiled at that, even though he couldn't see it. "Some people do their jobs better than others," she said, which was exactly what Cole had said to him, though she didn't know that. Brennan laughed, once quietly. "Take care, Ms. Bennett." After she hung up, Jordan was watching her with that expression she got, sometimes the one that meant she was seeing something she wanted to remember. "What?" Haley said. "You're different than you were 2 weeks ago," Jordan said. Haley looked at her. "I went 2 weeks without my wheelchair, Jordan." "Of course I'm not like that," Jordan said. "I mean, she thought for a second. "You were always strong. You have always been the most determined person I know, and I have known you for 6 years, but there's something different now." She tilted her head. "You're angry in a useful way." Haley considered this. "Is that a thing? You were always good at fighting for yourself. Now you're angry about the bigger thing. The thing where someone can look at a wheelchair and see an opportunity and not even register the person attached to it. That's," Jordan paused. "That's not just your problem anymore. You know that." Haley did know that. She had known it in some theoretical way. For a long time, she had written letters to local governments and argued with building managers about ramp specifications and filed accessibility complaints since she was 15 years old. But knowing it theoretically and feeling it in your body were two different things. And 2 weeks of depending on other people for things she had built her entire adult life to handle herself had moved something from theoretical to visceral in a way she couldn't undo. She was angry. Not at Ryan Mercer specifically, though. She had thoughts about Ryan Mercer that she was working through. She was angry at the size of the gap between what should have been in place to protect someone in her situation and what actually was. The chain on the porch, the 30-day insurance window, the 6-month loan wait list, the 37-second news segment. The way the whole system assumed that a person without mobility equipment would simply pause and wait while the appropriate channels processed her at their appropriate speed. She was angry at the gap, and Jordan was right. That anger was starting to feel like something other than just hurt. It was starting to feel like fuel. The arraignment was on a Friday morning, 6 days after Ryan's arrest. Haley had asked Jake to be there. She had asked Cole. She had not explained why she hadn't needed to. They had simply said yes. She had also asked Frank Dalton to come. Frank had hesitated. "I'm not much for courtrooms," he said. "I know," Haley said, "but I'd like you there." A brief pause. "Okay," he said. "I'll be there." The night before the arraignment, Haley wrote her statement by herself. Jordan offered to help, and Haley shook her head. Some things you have to say in your own words because they came from your own experience, and any other voice would diminish them. She wrote for 2 hours. She crossed out a lot. She rewrote. She read it aloud to herself twice, not for performance, but to hear how it landed, whether it said what she actually meant. She fell asleep at her desk at midnight, which was not where she had intended to fall asleep, and woke up at 5:30 with a stiff neck and her statement on the desk in front of her. She read it once more. It said what she meant. She got ready without Jordan's help, which was a point of quiet determination. Jordan had offered. Haley had said she was fine. In the absence of her chair still at Frank's shop 2 days from completion, she had borrowed a standard hospital chair from a local medical lending program, the kind that didn't fit her properly and required significantly more physical effort to operate. She had been using it all week. It was harder and slower and more exhausting than her own chair in every measurable way. She used it anyway. She refused to not show up. Cole had arranged transportation, a van with accessible seating, which arrived at her building at 8:15. Jake was already in it when she came down. He nodded at her. She nodded back. That was the extent of their greeting, and it was enough. Frank arrived at the courthouse separately with a quietness that was characteristic of him. She only knew he was there because Jake mentioned it as they went in. The arraignment itself was procedural. Ryan was brought in. The charges were read. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. A date was set for the preliminary hearing. It was all correct and measured and bore very little relationship to the emotional reality of why everyone in that room was there. Then Haley was asked if she wished to make a victim impact statement. She said yes. She didn't look at Ryan as she was wheeled to the position from which she would read. She had made a deliberate decision about this. She would look at him when she chose to, not reflexively. She wanted to be in control of every moment of this. She looked down at her paper. Then she looked up at the room. She found Jake. She found Cole. She found Frank standing in the back, his hands in his pockets, watching her. She looked down at the paper again. She began. My name is Haley Bennett. I am 20 years old. I have used a wheelchair since I was 8 years old following an accident that caused permanent damage to my spine. The chair that was stolen from my porch on the night of October 14th was not standard equipment. It was custom built for my body over 18 months. It is the device that allows me to go to class, to go to work, to leave my apartment, and to exist in the world on my own terms. Without it, I am dependent on other people for things that most people do not think about. Things like getting to the bathroom in the morning, getting to the kitchen, getting to the front door. She paused. When I came out and found my porch empty, I felt something I have worked my entire life not to feel. I felt helpless. Not because my wheelchair was a piece of equipment I was emotionally attached to, though I was, but because someone had looked at the thing that makes my independence possible and seen only an object. Something to take, something to break apart and sell. They did not see me. She stopped again. This time she looked at Ryan. He was already looking at her. She hadn't expected that. She had expected him to look away the way people do when they don't want to be accountable. But he wasn't looking away. He was looking directly at her, and his face had something on it that she hadn't anticipated seeing. She held his gaze. You didn't steal a chair, she said. You stole 11 days of my life. You stole my ability to get to my classes, which I will now have to make up. You stole my shifts at work, which I cannot get back. You stole 11 nights of sleep from my best friend who stayed on my couch because I could not be alone. You stole my mother's peace of mind across 4 towns. You stole from people who had nothing to do with whatever you needed that night. She looked back down at her paper. She had one more paragraph. She read it. I am not here to ask for revenge. I am here because I believe that the people in this room should understand what the thing you took actually was. Not its market value, not its components. What it was how I go to college. It was how I earn my own money. It was how I visit my friends. It was how I live my life. You took that from me. I want to make sure that is understood. She finished. The room was very quiet. Ryan Mercer was still looking at her. His lawyer said something quietly in his ear, and he didn't seem to hear it. He was still looking at Haley, and the expression on his face was the expression of a person who had just been made to understand something they could not undo. Haley gathered her papers. She turned her chair toward the aisle, and then she did something no one in the room expected. She stopped. She turned back around. She looked at Ryan one more time directly for exactly 3 seconds. And she said quietly enough that only the people closest to her heard, I hope you understand now. She didn't wait for a response. She moved toward the door. Jake held it open. Outside in the hallway, Cole was already there. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite readable, something between respect and something older. Something that meant he had seen a lot of people in difficult moments and knew what it looked like when a person was genuinely holding themselves together. You okay, he said. Haley thought about it. I'm angry, she said, but it's the useful kind. Cole nodded. He didn't ask what that meant. He seemed to understand it perfectly. Frank came out a few seconds later. He stopped when he reached Haley and looked at her for a moment without saying anything the way he did when he was processing something. Then he said, 2 more days, maybe less. She looked up at him. The chair, he said. I think I can have it done in 2 days. I've been thinking about some additional reinforcement on the frame. There was a stress point I want to address before I close it up to make sure it doesn't become a problem later. But 2 days. Haley looked at this man she had known for less than 2 weeks. This man who had answered the phone when Jake called and said, "Bring me the parts." This man whose daughter's name was Ellie and who had heard 4 days worth of crying through a closed bedroom door and had carried it ever since. "Frank," she said. "Don't thank me," he said immediately. "I'm not thanking you," she said. "I'm just saying your name." Frank looked at her for a moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh and said, "2 days," and walked toward the exit before anything else could be said. Jake watched him go. Then he looked at Haley. "He's going to pretend that didn't get to him," Jake said. "I know," Haley said. "It got to him." "I know," she said again, and there was something warm in her voice. She sat in the borrowed chair that didn't fit her right in a courthouse hallway, flanked by a mechanic and a club president, and a room full of people who had come out for her on a Friday morning for no reason other than that she had needed them to. Ryan Mercer was behind that door. Her wheelchair was 2 days away. And something that had been born in the anger of that empty porch. Something that didn't have a name yet, but was taking shape quietly and deliberately in the back of her mind, was getting closer to becoming something real. She could feel it. She didn't know yet what she would call it, but she knew it wasn't finished. Frank Dalton finished 2 days early. He called Jake at 6:40 in the morning on a Wednesday, which was not a normal hour for most people, but was entirely normal for Frank, who had been in his shop since 5, and who measured the start of a workday, not by the clock, but by how much light he needed to see what he was doing. "It's done," he said when Jake answered. Jake was quiet for a second, the particular quiet of someone who has just been pulled out of sleep, but is processing something important fast. "Already. The additional reinforcement went cleaner than I expected. Everything's aligned. I've tested the mechanisms 3 times. It's better than it was before." A pause. "I added something." "What do you mean you added something?" "The lateral support on the left side had a minor design flaw. Nothing that would have caused immediate problems, but over time with regular use, it would have created fatigue stress on the joint. I redesigned the bracket. The manufacturer's version costs about $200 as a retrofit. I fabricated a replacement that's 30% stronger." Jake was quiet again. "Frank, you redesigned a component. It needed to be done. You redesigned a component for a chair that doesn't belong to you for a girl you've never met at 6 in the morning. Are you going to call her or am I sorry?" Frank said. Jake laughed. It was a short, real laugh, the kind that comes out before you decide whether it's appropriate. "I'll call her," he said. "Give me an hour. Tell her it'll be ready for pickup anytime after 9. Jake called Cole first. That was habit. Cole was the axis around which most things in their world rotated, and Jake had learned a long time ago that keeping Cole informed was both respectful and practically useful, because Cole had a way of seeing the next 3 steps before anyone else had finished thinking about the current one. Cole answered on the first ring. "Frank's done," Jake said, a beat. "How does it look?" "Better than before." He redesigned a bracket. Cole made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close. "Of course he did." A pause. "We should return it properly." Jake had been thinking the same thing on some level, not articulating it exactly, but feeling it the way you feel when a situation has a shape and you want to honor that shape. "What are you thinking?" "She's been through 3 weeks of this," Cole said. "The theft, the insurance, the system failing her, the arraignment. All of it." He paused. "This doesn't end with Frank handing her a chair at his shop door. That's not how this ends." "No," Jake agreed. "I'll make some calls," Cole said, which was what Cole Harrison said when he had already decided what was going to happen and was simply beginning the process of making it real. Jake called Haley at 7:15. She answered before the second ring, which he had come to recognize as her pattern. She kept her phone close and answered fast, a habit probably built from years of being in situations where she needed to be reachable and where delays could matter. "Jake," she said, not a question, just his name, the way you say the name of someone you've been waiting to hear from. "It's done," he said. The silence on her end lasted exactly 4 seconds, and Jake counted them without meaning to, the way you count things when they matter. "Done, done," she said. "Done, done. Frank says it's better than it was. He redesigned a bracket." She stopped. "He redesigned a bracket." That's what I said. Jake, he was supposed to just fix it. I know. He was supposed to restore it, that's all. He didn't have to. Haley, Jake kept his voice even. Frank Dalton doesn't do things halfway. I should have warned you about that. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, the particular sound of someone whose emotional register is too full for any single response. When can I get it? Anytime after 9. But Cole wants to talk to you first. A brief pause. About what? He'll call you in a bit. Just don't make any plans for this afternoon. She was quiet. He could hear her processing. Jake, what's happening? Something good, he said. Just let it happen. He hung up before she could ask more questions, which she would have because Haley Bennett was constitutionally incapable of not asking the next question. He had figured that out about her within the first 10 minutes of knowing her and had found it unexpectedly one of the most admirable things about her. She did not accept the surface of things. She pushed until she understood. He was going to let her not understand this one for a few more hours. Cole made his calls. The first was to Dex, who had barely spoken at the original table meeting, but who had been quietly present at every step since showing up, helping, not requiring acknowledgement, which was its own kind of character. Cole told him the chair was ready and what he was thinking. Dex said he was in. The second call was to Marcus Haley's neighbor, who had helped install the original chain and who had spent the weeks since the theft in a state of low-grade guilt that wasn't entirely rational. He hadn't known what was going to happen, couldn't have prevented it, but that was real nonetheless. Marcus answered and said yes before Cole had finished the sentence. The third call was to Patricia Owens. Patricia picked up immediately. Cole Harrison, she said. I was wondering when you'd call. The chair's been repaired, Cole said. We're returning it today. A pause. When? This afternoon. I'll send you the address. Can I bring a photographer? Cole thought about this. He thought about Haley, who had never asked for attention and had never wanted sympathy, who had put up those flyers because she needed people to see the chair, not herself. He thought about what she would want. Then he thought about what the story could mean for other people in her situation. The insurance windows and the wait lists and the 37 seconds and all the other systems that ground slowly while people waited and couldn't move. The visibility had already started conversations. It had already made people angry in the useful way, not just about Haley, but about the gap. Yes, Cole said, but you follow her lead. The moment she's uncomfortable, you step back. Understood, Patricia said. I know how to do my job, Mr. Harrison. I know you do, he said. That's why I called you. He called Haley at 8:30. She answered the same way she always did, fast-focused a voice that was ready. Cole, she said, the chair is ready. Frank says anytime after 9. He paused. I'd like to bring it to you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, Cole said. I want to. The people who've been part of this, Jake, Dex, some of the others, they'd like to be there, if that's okay with you. A long pause, longer than usual for Haley. Cole, she said, what exactly are you planning? Oh, and Obama. Nothing dramatic, he said, which was technically true, in the sense that no one had planned anything dramatic, and yet Cole was also experienced enough to know that certain moments simply became dramatic on their own by virtue of what they meant. Patricia Owens is going to be there, Haley said. It wasn't a question. I called her, yes. You can tell her to leave if you want. That's completely your choice. Always has been. Silence. She's been fair, Haley said finally. Her piece was fair. It was, Cole agreed. Another pause. Okay, Haley said. Okay, what time? 2 o'clock. I'll have Frank bring the chair to you. You're home. She was quiet for a moment. My home, she said. Your home, he confirmed. Where it belongs. After she hung up, Haley sat in the borrowed chair in the middle of her apartment and looked at the space by the front door where her chair usually lived, where she had kept it since the day it arrived, positioned, so she could transfer into it first thing every morning without having to move far. The space had been empty for 3 weeks. She had stopped looking at it after the first few days because looking at it hurt in a way that wasn't useful. Now she looked at it. 2 o'clock. She called her mother. Susan Bennett answered in the way she always answered now, with the alertness that said she had been half waiting, that some part of her was always listening for Haley's number on the screen. They're bringing it back to, Haley said. Her mother made a sound, not words, just a release of something that had been held for 3 weeks, compressed and careful, and costing her more than she had let on. "Mom," Haley said. "I'm fine," Susan said in the voice of someone who was absolutely not fine, but was choosing to be fine on purpose. "What time?" "2, you don't have to." "I'm leaving right now," Susan said. "Mom, it's an hour-and-a-half drive." "Then I'd better leave right now." A pause. "Haley, I'm going to be there when they bring that chair back to you. That is not negotiable." Haley opened her mouth, closed it. "Okay," she said. "Good." And the warmth in Susan's voice underneath the firmness was the specific warmth of a mother who had been terrified for 3 weeks and was now being given permission to stop being terrified. "I'll see you at 2. Jordan arrived at 10:30. She had a key and used it coming in with a paper bag from the bakery down the street that Haley had not visited in 3 weeks because she couldn't get there in the borrowed chair, which was technically functional, but practically exhausting in ways that added up fast. She put the bag on the kitchen table and sat down and looked at Haley. "Today's the day," Jordan said. "Today's the day," Haley confirmed. Jordan looked at her for a moment. Really looked. The way she had been looking at Haley for 22 days now, with the particular attention of someone who loves a person and is watching them go through something and is tracking every shift, every change, every small sign of where they're at. "You're different," Jordan said. "Not for the first time, but more different than yesterday." Haley thought about how to explain it. She had been thinking about it since the arraignment, since the moment she had looked at Ryan Mercer and said, "I hope you understand now," and turned her chair toward the door. She had been thinking about it since Frank had said 2 days, and since Jake had called at 7:15 this morning, and since Cole had said, "You're home." "I feel like," she started, then stopped, started again. "I feel like I've been handed back something I didn't know I had lost until I lost it." Jordan waited. "Not just the chair," Haley said. "I mean, yes, the chair. Obviously the chair, but..." She looked at the empty space by the door. "I built this whole life around the idea that I could handle things, that I didn't need to be rescued, that independence meant doing it myself." She paused. "And then this happened, and I couldn't do it myself. I had to ask. I had to let people help. And I thought..." Her voice was quieter now. "I thought that would feel like losing something, like admitting a limit." "But," Jordan said. "But it didn't," Haley said. It felt like the opposite, like a different kind of strength, like understanding that independence doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means being clear about who you are and what you need and trusting the right people with that." She looked at Jordan. "I've known you for 6 years, and I've never told you how much those 22 days on the couch cost you. I've never really said it." Jordan looked at her steadily. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Haley held her gaze. "You gave up 3 weeks of your life. You rearranged everything. You slept on a couch that is, frankly, not good for an adult human back." Jordan laughed at that sudden and real. "And you did all of it without asking me once whether I was going to be okay, because you knew that question would have been cruel. You just showed up and kept showing up." She paused. "That's not a small thing, Jordan." Jordan's expression did something complicated. She looked down at the table for a second, then back up. "You would have done the same," she said quietly. "Yes," Haley said, "but I still want you to know that I know." They sat with that for a moment. Then Jordan reached into the paper bag and produced 2 croissants and a container of butter and said, "Okay, we have 3 hours. Tell me what you're going to say when they get here." "I don't know yet," Haley said. "You always know," Jordan said, "even when you think you don't." She was right about that. At Frank's shop, the morning was quiet. Frank had stayed later than usual the night before, not because anything required it, but because finishing the chair hadn't quite felt complete until he had checked everything one more time in the early evening light. He had gone home at 9, which was late for him, and slept better than he had in a week. Now he was in the shop again, the chair assembled and ready, sitting in the middle of the floor. He stood looking at it for a while. It was good work. He knew good work when he saw it, and this was it, not just functionally, but in the small details that most people wouldn't notice, and that mattered enormously to the person who would use it every day. The lateral bracket was stronger and cleaner than the original. The frame alignment was within tolerances he rarely achieved on restoration work. The sunflower on the armrest was stable and clear, the paint no longer at risk. Ellie called at 9. "Is it done?" she asked. She had been tracking this more closely than Frank had explicitly told her to, which meant she had been talking to Jake, who had been talking to Cole, which was a communication network he hadn't authorized but also couldn't bring himself to be annoyed about. "It's done," he said. "How does it look?" "Good," he said. "Really good." A pause. "Are you going to go when they return it?" He had been thinking about this. Cole had called him yesterday, mentioned the plan, said Frank was welcome if he wanted to come. Frank had said he'd think about it. He had been thinking about it since 5 this morning. "Yes," he said. Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then she said "good" in the tone she used when she had been hoping for a specific answer and had just gotten it. "I don't need to be there," he said, half to her and half to himself. "The chair is what matters. I'm just the mechanic." "Dad," Ellie said, "you redesigned a bracket at 6 in the morning for a girl you've never met. You are not just the mechanic." He didn't have an answer for that. "I'll send you a photo," he said instead. "You better send me more than a photo," she said. "Call me after." He said he would. At 1:45, Jake pulled up outside Frank's shop in a van he had borrowed from a buddy who ran a delivery service large enough to transport the chair safely, clean enough that Frank hadn't winced when he saw it, which was Jake's private measure of success. Frank was already outside, standing next to the chair, which he had covered with a moving blanket for transport. Jake looked at the blanket. "Is that necessary?" "It's cold," Frank said. "It's a wheelchair." "It's a very good wheelchair," Frank said in the specific tone of a craftsman who has just spent 10 days on something and developed an investment in its well-being that slightly exceeded the ration. Well, Jake did not argue. He loaded the chair. They drove to Haley's building. They were not alone. Colin had sent word through the club 2 days ago. Not a requirement, not a summons, just a message that said the chair was being returned Wednesday afternoon and that anyone who wanted to be there was welcome. He hadn't known how many people would show up. He hadn't tried to predict it. He found out when he pulled up to Haley's building at 1:55. There were 14 motorcycles parked along the street. Not a coordinated arrival. People had come from different directions at different times and simply parked where they found space, which meant the motorcycles stretched half a block in both directions and drew the attention of everyone in the surrounding area who happened to be near a window or walking past. Cole sat in his car for a moment, looking at the line of bikes. Then he got out and walked toward the building. Marcus was already there. He was standing near the entrance with the expression of a man who had expected something modest and was recalibrating in real time. He saw Cole and said, "There are a lot of motorcycles." "Yeah," Cole said. "I didn't," Marcus gestured vaguely. "I didn't realize it would be." "Neither did I, honestly," Cole said. Patricia Owens was there too, with a photographer named Sam, who was professional enough to be unobtrusive and had positioned himself where he could see the entrance without being in anyone's way. Patricia and Cole exchanged a nod, no words needed. They had an understanding. Susan Bennett arrived at 1:58, which was 2 minutes before she had committed to arriving, which was absolutely characteristic. She was a small woman with Haley's same blonde coloring and her daughter's same quality of deliberate composure, the kind that came not from never feeling things, but from deciding when and how to express them. She introduced herself to Cole, shook his hand with both of hers, and said, "Thank you," in a voice that contained 3 weeks of fear and relief and something close to grace. Cole said, "She did the work. We just helped." Susan looked at him for a moment. "You're more modest than I expected," she said. "I'm exactly as modest as the situation requires," Cole said, which made her smile for the first time. Upstairs, Haley's phone buzzed. Jordan picked it up, first checked it, and looked at Haley. "Jake says they're downstairs," Jordan said. Haley straightened in the borrowed chair. She had changed twice that morning, not because she was performing anything, but because this was a moment and she wanted to be present for it correctly. She had settled on a dark blue sweater her mother had given her last birthday and jeans and the silver earrings she wore when she needed to feel like herself. "Okay," she said. "Ready?" Jordan asked. Haley thought about this for a real second, not the automatic yes, the honest answer. "I've been ready for 22 days, she said. They went downstairs. The elevator opened onto the lobby, and through the glass of the front entrance, Haley could see even from inside the motorcycles lining the street. She stopped moving for a moment. Jordan, pushing the borrowed chair, stopped too. "Cole said a few people," Haley said. "He said a few people might come," Jordan said carefully. "He did say that. That is not a few people." "No," Jordan agreed, "it is not." Through the glass, she could count at least 12 people visible, and the motorcycles stretched beyond her line of sight. Marcus was near the door, and there moving toward the entrance now was her mother, and the sight of Susan Bennett's face through the glass, composed and bright-eyed, and exactly 4 towns away from where she should have been hit, Haley in the chest in a way that nothing else that morning had. Jordan pushed the door open. The cold hit first, the same cold as 22 days ago, and for exactly 1 second, Haley was back on her own porch looking at 2 pieces of chain. Then the second beat, and she was here, and her mother was walking toward her, and the crowd of people who had materialized on the street for no reason except that they thought it mattered was very quiet. Susan didn't say anything. She just put her hands on Haley's face and looked at her daughter for a long moment, the way you look at something you were afraid you might not get to look at properly again. Then she stepped back because she knew her daughter, and she knew this moment wasn't about her. Jake came forward. He was carrying the chair which he had removed from the van and unfolded, and he was carrying it the way Frank had asked him to, carefully level the way you carry something that matters. He set it down in front of Haley. She looked at it. 22 days. That was how long it had been since she had seen it. In that time, it had been taken apart, stored in a stranger's unit, found by people who hadn't given up, repaired by a man she had never met, who had redesigned a bracket at 6 in the morning because it needed to be done. It looked different. The same but different. The frame had a quality she couldn't immediately name. Cleaner somehow, more precise. The armrest with the sunflower caught the light, and the paint was stable and clear. Jordan's 2 coats of varnish having survived everything. She looked up at Jake. Frank says it's better than it was before, Jake said. He redesigned a bracket, Haley said. That's what he does, Jake said. She looked around. Frank was standing toward the back of the group near the van, his hands in his pockets, looking at a point slightly to the left of everyone else. The characteristic posture of a man who is present but doesn't want to be at the center of anything. She found his eyes anyway. He gave her a small nod. Nothing more. She held his gaze for a moment long enough to say without words what she couldn't say out loud without both of them being uncomfortable about it. Then she looked back at the chair. She transferred. It wasn't a dramatic moment technically. It was a practiced physical movement she had performed thousands of times, but the first time she settled her weight into that seat, into the angle and height and precise custom geometry of a chair built for her specific body, the difference from the borrowed chair was so immediate and so complete that she actually closed her eyes for a second. Just a second. Then she opened them. She gripped the wheels. She moved forward 3 feet and stopped. She adjusted her posture and felt everything align the way it was supposed to align, the lateral support doing exactly what Frank had intended it to do, the frame responding the way her frame always had, and somehow better. She exhaled. From somewhere in the group, she didn't see who someone started to clap. Quietly at first, then more people. It wasn't a stadium moment. It was 14 people standing on a sidewalk in the cold clapping for a 20-year-old woman who had just gotten back something that should never have been taken. Haley looked at the group, at Jake, who was watching her with an expression he clearly thought was neutral and was absolutely not. At Cole, standing a few steps back with his arms crossed and the smallest possible version of a satisfied expression on his face. At Marcus, who was blinking rapidly in the way that people blink when they are attempting to manage their tear ducts in public. At her mother, who had given up on managing hers entirely. She looked at all of them. And then she said the thing she had been composing in her mind since Jordan had asked what she was going to say when they got here. I spent 22 days feeling like I'd been erased, she said. Her voice was steady. Like someone had reached into my life and taken the thing that proved I was here, that I was real, that I could take up space in the world on my own terms. She paused, and then a stranger read a flyer at a gas station, and another stranger answered a phone at 7 in the morning. And a man I had never met decided my chair deserved more than it had gotten before he gave it back to me. She looked at Frank when she said that, and he looked back at a point slightly to the left. I don't have a word for what that is. I've been looking for one. The closest I can get is witness. You all witnessed that this mattered. You decided that what happened to me was worth responding to. And that is, her voice shifted, not breaking, just changing pitch the way voices do when something is genuinely felt rather than performed. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between a person feeling like they're alone in something and knowing they're not. She stopped. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Cole said quietly, "We should get you inside. It's cold." Which was such a perfectly Cole Harrison thing to say that Jake made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated, and Marcus gave up entirely on the tear duct situation, and Susan Bennett smiled the way she smiled when someone said something that was practical and loving at exactly the same time. Haley smiled too. "Yeah," she said, "okay." But she didn't go inside immediately. First, she went to each person on that sidewalk, not a speech at each stop. Just acknowledgement, a look, a word, a handshake, or a hand on an arm, or in her mother's case, a long hug that Susan held 3 seconds past the point where Haley would normally have pulled away, and Haley let her because some things you allow when you understand the cost of the alternative. She reached Frank last. He was still near the van, still doing the thing where he looked slightly to the side, and she rolled up to him deliberately and stopped close enough that not looking at her directly required actual effort. He looked at her. "The bracket," she said. He shrugged slightly. Standard reinforcement. "Frank," he was quiet. "Your daughter," she said. "Ellie." His jaw moved slightly. "4 days," she said. He looked at her, and the thing in his expression that she had been trying to read since the first time she'd seen it across a courthouse hallway, when he had said 2 more days and walked away before anything else could be said, was clear to her now. It was love. Enormous, complicated, redirected love, the kind a parent carries for a child who has been through something the parent couldn't prevent and has never quite stopped feeling guilty about. "Tell her thank you," Haley said, "for the 4 days." Frank looked at her for a long moment. "I will," he said. She nodded, then she turned her chair and went inside. The lobby was warm. Jordan was right behind her. Her mother was right behind Jordan. The door closed on the cold and the motorcycles and the people who had come out on a Wednesday afternoon to witness a 20-year-old woman getting her life back. Upstairs, back in her apartment, back in the space she had designed around her own independence, Haley rolled to the spot by the front door, the empty spot that had been too painful to look at for 3 weeks. She stopped there, sat for a moment. Then she moved to the kitchen, to the couch, to the hallway, to every part of her apartment she had been navigating differently for 22 days. Everything was the same distance it had always been. Everything responded to her the way it was supposed to respond. She sat at her kitchen table. Jordan made tea. Her mother sat across from her and held her hands and didn't say anything for a while, which was the right thing. Later that evening, after her mother had driven back and Jordan had finally gone home to her own apartment and her own bed after 22 nights on a couch, Haley sat alone in the quiet. It was the first time in 22 days she had been alone with a quiet that didn't feel like a problem. She pulled out the notebook she kept on the kitchen table, the one she had been writing in since she was 15, the one that held the letter to the city council about sidewalk specs, and the draft of the accessibility complaint about the gym, and the notes from 3 years of quietly insisting that the world make room for her. She opened it to a new page. She thought about the gap, the insurance windows, the wait lists, the 37 seconds, the systems that process people at their own pace while the people waited in apartments unable to move. She thought about what Jordan had said. Not just your problem anymore. You know that. She thought about Patricia Owen's article and the 47,000 shares and the emails she had been getting since it ran from people who had their own stories. Different details, same gap. Equipment denied or delayed or lost in systems that didn't quite work the way they were supposed to. She thought about all of it. Then she picked up her pen. At the top of the blank page, she wrote 3 words. She looked at them. She didn't know yet exactly what shape this was going to take. She didn't know how long it would take or how hard it would be or whether she had enough left in her after 22 days of hard to build something new. She didn't know any of that, but she had been building things since she was 12 years old. She knew how it started. It started with a problem that made you angry in the useful way. It started with a blank page and 3 words. She looked at what she had written and felt the same thing she had felt on the sidewalk when she had gripped those wheels and moved forward for the first time, everything aligning the way it was supposed to align, the structure responding correctly, her own weight settled exactly where it belonged. She started to write. The 3 words Haley had written at the top of that blank page were not a mission statement. They were not a slogan. They were not the kind of polished language that ends up on a website or a brochure or a grant application. They were just the rawest version of what she was thinking, written the way she always wrote when something was real, fast, unedited, before her brain could talk her into making it smaller. She had written, "Don't let them." That was it. 3 words. Don't let them. Don't let the systems erase you. Don't let the 30-day windows and the 6-month wait lists and the 37-second news segments decide how much space you're allowed to take up. Don't let the Ryan Mercers of the world look at the thing that makes your life possible and see only an object. Don't let them. She stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then she started writing everything beneath them. Not organized, not structured, just everything she had been thinking for 22 days that hadn't had anywhere to go, yet the specific cruelty of the insurance window, the way the lending programs were structured to help people after everything had already gone wrong, instead of building systems that prevented it, the complete absence of any alert or tracking system for high-value medical equipment that could have flagged the serial number the moment it hit an open marketplace. She wrote about the emails she had been receiving since Patricia's article ran. 19 emails in 4 days from people who had their own version of this story. Different equipment, different thief, same gap, same silence, same terrible patience required of people who could not afford to be patient. She wrote until 2 in the morning. When she stopped, her hand ached, and the notebook had 12 pages of notes and the beginning of something that felt unmistakably like a plan. She slept better that night than she had in a month. 3 weeks later, Haley sat across from Patricia Owens at the same coffee shop where Patricia had conducted her initial interview for the article, and she slid a folder across the table. Patricia opened it. She read the first page, then the second. She didn't look up until she'd read 4 pages, which took about 6 minutes, during which Haley drank her coffee and waited. Patricia looked up. "You wrote this yourself," she said. "Yes. In 3 weeks." "I had a lot of time to think," Haley said. 22 days of it, actually. Patricia looked back at the folder. The document inside was a proposal, specifically a proposal for what Haley was calling the Independence Access Initiative, a nonprofit framework designed to address 3 specific gaps she had identified through her own experience and through the 19 emails and now the 43 emails she had received since the article ran. The gaps were equipment protection and recovery emergency lending with a response window of 48 hours instead of 6 months, and a legal advocacy component for insurance disputes involving adaptive equipment. She had outlined funding sources, organizational structure, a 3-year rollout plan, and perhaps most unusually for a document written at 2 in the morning, over 3 weeks, a concrete list of people who had already committed to being involved. Patricia stopped at the list. She read it. Then she looked at Haley. "Frank Dalton is on here." "Yes." "As Director of Equipment Assessment." "He's the best person in 4 counties for that job," Haley said. "He also has an extremely personal understanding of why it matters." "Jake Morrison, Liaison and Community Outreach." She paused. "He knows people in the right places." That's not a polite way of saying something else. He genuinely knows the networks where stolen and discarded equipment ends up, and having someone who can move through those networks is going to matter. Patricia looked at the next name. "Cole Harrison, Advisory Board." "He said yes before I finished asking," Haley said. Patricia set the folder down and looked at Haley for a moment with the expression she used when she was assembling a story in real time. "Marcus Webb," she said, "your neighbor. He's been asking me every day since this happened what he can do. Now he has an answer." Haley leaned forward slightly. "Patricia, I need to know if you're interested in covering this, not as a follow-up to the theft story, as its own thing, because what I'm building isn't about what happened to me. It's about what happens to people like me consistently, systemically, when the equipment that makes their lives possible becomes vulnerable and the systems in place to protect them move too slowly." Patricia looked at her steadily. "You know I'm going to write about this either way." "I know," Haley said. "I'm asking if you want to be part of telling it from the beginning." A pause. Patricia Owens had been in journalism long enough to recognize the rare moment when a story arrived already assembled, not with a bow on it, not easy or uncomplicated, but with a clarity about what it was that made everything else simpler. She had covered a lot of stories. She had covered some important ones. She had covered very few that felt from the first read like they were going to matter in the way this one was going to matter. "Yes," she said. Haley nodded. "Good. I have a meeting with a disability rights attorney next Thursday. You can come. Patricia smiled, slightly surprised, slightly delighted. You work fast. I've had 22 days of practice at being impatient, Haley said. The attorney's name was Diana Marsh, and she was the kind of lawyer who had chosen her specialty not because it was lucrative, it was not particularly lucrative, but because she had a specific and durable fury about the way disabled people were treated by insurance systems, and she had decided a long time ago to make that fury useful. She met with Haley for 2 hours and came out of that meeting with the same expression Patricia had had. After reading the proposal, the expression of someone who had just encountered something they didn't expect to work, but was clearly going to. The insurance reform piece is the hardest, Diana told her plainly. 30-day windows are standard language in most policies, and changing that requires either litigation or legislative action. Litigation is slow and expensive. Legislative action is slower and requires building relationships with people who have a lot of competing priorities. I know, Haley said. That's why I'm starting with the emergency lending piece. That's where we can move fastest, help people, while the bigger changes are in progress and build the evidence base for why the other changes are necessary. Diana looked at her. How old are you? 20, Haley said. Have you done this before? I've been filing accessibility complaints since I was 15, Haley said. And I once convinced a school principal to install a ramp by writing him a letter every week for 2 months until he gave in just to stop the letters. Diana laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of her. I'll represent the organization pro bono, she said, for the first year at minimum. Haley said thank you, and Diana said, don't thank me. Thank whoever set the insurance policy that made you angry enough to do this, which was the kind of thing that only a very specific type of attorney says, and which Haley found she liked enormously. Ryan Mercer's preliminary hearing was scheduled for the same week as Haley's third meeting with Diana. She almost didn't go. She had said what she needed to say at the arraignment, and she was deep enough in building the initiative that taking a day away felt like a cost she wasn't sure was worth paying. Jordan told her to go. Not for him, Jordan said. For you. You need to see how it ends. So she went. Kessler had negotiated a plea. Ryan had agreed to it. The charge was theft of adaptive medical equipment enhanced under the disability provisions, and the plea carried a sentence of 18 months with mandatory community service and restitution. The restitution was calculated based on the full replacement cost of the equipment at original value, not the repair cost, the replacement cost, plus documented income losses from Haley's missed work shifts, plus a contribution to a local disability services organization that Diana had suggested and the DA had agreed to. Haley sat in the courtroom and listened to the judge read the terms. She was not looking at Ryan when the sentence was announced. She was looking at her hands, which were resting on the wheels of her chair. Her chair, the one that was better than it had been before, with Frank's bracket and Jordan's sunflower, and 22 days of meaning now layered into every component. When the judge finished, she looked up. Ryan was looking at her. He had been looking at her, she realized, for most of the hearing. Not with hostility, not with the blankness he had shown at the arraignment, with something that was harder to name and in some ways harder to look at a recognition. The specific, uncomfortable expression of a person who has finally understood what they did and cannot undo the understanding. His lawyer leaned over to say something and he didn't respond. He kept looking at Haley. She held his gaze this time for longer than she had at the arraignment. Then she looked away. Not because she was afraid of him, not because she was angry, because she had said what she needed to say, because she had looked at him enough for the truth of it to land, and now the rest was his to carry. She had work to do, and it had nothing to do with him anymore. Outside the courthouse, Cole was there. He had not come inside. Cole Harrison had a complicated relationship with courtrooms that he had never explained in detail, and that Jake had quietly indicated nobody should ask about, but he was standing near the entrance when she came out, and he fell into step beside her without needing to ask how it had gone. 18 months, she said, plus restitution. Cole nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Does it feel like enough? She thought about this honestly. It feels like what it is, she said, which is a consequence, not an erasure, not a fix, just a consequence. She glanced at him. The fix is the other thing. He knew what she meant. She had told him about the initiative 2 weeks ago, shown him the proposal and asked him to be on the advisory board. He had said yes before she finished asking, which she had described accurately to Patricia. But he had also read the whole proposal carefully before their next conversation, and the second conversation had been different, more specific, more substantive, more like the conversation of two people building something together than the conversation of a benefactor and a recipient. That was another thing that had shifted. That was the thing Haley had been trying to articulate to Jordan about the difference between independence and doing everything alone. She was not the recipient anymore. She was not the person at the end of the chain of help. She was building the chain itself, and the people who had helped her were being folded into something larger, their effort multiplied through a structure that would reach people they would never personally know. The first board meeting is next week, she said. I know, Cole said. I moved something to make it work. She looked at him. You didn't have to. Haley, he said in the patient tone he used when she was about to say something he had already decided not to accept. I rearranged my schedule, that's all. Don't make it into something. Okay, she said. She paused. Thank you. He made a sound that was not quite an acknowledgement and not quite a dismissal. The specific sound of a man who receives thanks badly but is working on it. Jake's waiting, he said. He wants to buy you lunch. She raised an eyebrow. Jake wants to buy me lunch. He expressed it more as, we should get food. But that's Jake's version of wanting to buy someone lunch. She smiled. Okay, she said. They walked toward this parking area, and something about the rhythm of it. Cole on her left, the sound of her wheels on the pavement. The cold air with a different quality now than it had had 22 days ago on her porch, felt like a version of the world that had been rearranged by what had happened. Not back to what it was, but forward into something new. Something that had a better architecture than the original. Frank's bracket, she thought, stronger than what was there before. Jake was leaning against his truck when they reached the lot. He had the expression he wore when he was pretending he hadn't been waiting, which he absolutely had been. How'd it go? He said. 18 months, Haley said. He nodded. Restitution. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, looking at something past her shoulder. Then he looked back. Good. You already knew, didn't you? She said. Brennan told you. Jake made a face that confirmed he absolutely had already known. Brennan may have sent a message this morning. So why did you ask? I wanted to hear how you said it, Jake said simply. She looked at him. This man who had stopped at a gas station and read a flyer and called a stranger at 7 p.m. because he couldn't walk away from it. This man who had made 14 phone calls and found a storage unit and called Cole and then called Haley and told her something good was coming and not to make any plans for the afternoon. This man who she had learned in the weeks since was not unusual among the people around him, that this capacity for practical, immediate, unsentimental care was something he lived inside every day so naturally that he didn't even have language for it. Jake, she said. He looked at her. You changed my life, she said. You know that. He shifted. He was clearly uncomfortable. You would have found another way, he said. You were already fighting before I called. I was fighting, she agreed. But fighting alone and fighting with people behind you are two different things. And you're the reason I had people behind me. She held his gaze. I need you to just take that, without arguing with me about it. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that he didn't try to hide. Okay, he said. Okay. Then he pulled open the truck door and said, Get in, I know a place. She laughed. It was the same laugh she had produced that night in the kitchen with Jordan, short and surprised and completely real. I'm in a wheelchair, Jake. I know. The place has parking and a ramp. I checked. She stopped laughing. She looked at him. He had checked. Before inviting her to lunch, before they had even left the courthouse, Jake Morrison had checked that wherever he was taking her was accessible, without being asked, without making it a thing. She didn't have words for that in the moment. She filed it away instead, the same place she filed all the things that were too meaningful for immediate expression, and that she would write down later in the notebook at the kitchen table on pages that were building towards something real. The first board meeting of the Independence Access Initiative took place on a Tuesday evening in a conference room that Diana Marsh's firm made available free of charge, which was one of those small practical kindnesses that the initiative was increasingly built on people offering what they had, no fanfare, just a direct transfer of resource to need. There were 11 people in the room. Haley at the head of the table, because Jordan had arranged the chairs that way before anyone arrived and nobody moved her. Frank to her left with a notepad and two mechanical pencils because Frank brought his own writing instruments to every meeting, a fact that Jake had warned Haley about and that she found inexplicably endearing. Jake across from Frank looking slightly out of place in a meeting room, but paying closer attention than anyone would have assumed. Cole at the far end of the table with his arms crossed and the particular focused stillness of a man who was there to listen before he spoke. Diana beside Cole with a legal pad. Marcus beside Haley, still slightly amazed every time he walked into a room and found himself part of something larger than he had planned on. Patricia Owens in the corner with a small recorder and a promise not to publish anything from this meeting without explicit permission. And four others, a physical therapist named Dr. Renata Obi, who had reached out after Patricia's article, a social worker named Terrence Gray, who worked with disabled adults navigating benefit systems, a tech developer named Maya Chu, who had emailed Haley about building a serial number tracking system for medical equipment, and Susan Bennett, who had driven an hour and 40 minutes without being asked because her daughter was running a meeting and she was going to be there. Haley looked around the room. She had started writing 3 words in a notebook 4 weeks ago. Don't let them. She had no idea in that moment that 5 weeks later, she would be sitting at the head of a table with 11 people who had all independently and for their own reasons decided that the gap was unacceptable and that doing something about it was worth their time. She had not planned any of this. She had planned the notebook. She had planned the calls. She had planned the proposal. But she had not planned these specific people in this specific room because you cannot plan for what happens when a story reaches the right people, people who are already living near the problem, who already feel the edges of the gap in their own work, in their own lives, who just needed a point of convergence. She had become the point of convergence. She opened the meeting. She started as she always started with the direct version. No preamble, no revisiting of what everyone already knew. She said, we're here to build something that should have existed already. The gap between when adaptive equipment is lost or damaged and when a person can access a replacement is measured in days and weeks and sometimes months, and people cannot wait that long. That gap is what we're closing. Let's talk about how. For the next 3 hours, they talked about how. Maya presented a prototype of the tracking system, a database linked to serial numbers and insurance records that could flag stolen equipment on resale platforms within hours instead of the current situation, which was essentially nothing. Dr. Obi talked about the clinical side, the way prolonged equipment loss caused physical regression in patients who had worked for years to build specific strength and mobility patterns, something that was almost never discussed in the legal and insurance conversation about theft, but that was a real and documented consequence. Terrence talked about the benefit navigation piece in the specific language required to push insurance companies faster, the phrases that triggered expedited review, and the documentation that made them stick. Frank talked about the assessment process, what a standardized equipment evaluation looked like, how long it took, what certification would be required for assessors who weren't him. Cole spoke twice, both times briefly, both times directly. The first time was about funding he had in the 3 weeks since Haley had told him about the initiative, had conversations with 3 people he knew who had money and the inclination to put it toward things that worked. He described what he had learned from those conversations in the flat, practical language of a man who had been navigating complex networks his whole life and understood how these things operated. The second time was to answer a question from Terrence about community outreach in areas where institutional trust was low. Cole said without irony, that's actually what we're good at, and the room understood what he meant. Jake said nothing for 2 hours. Then at a point in the conversation where the discussion about equipment recovery had reached a practical wall, the question of how to build the network of contacts in repair shops and parts dealers that would make the tracking system actually functional, that would create human eyes in the places where stolen equipment moved, Jake put his notepad on the table and said, I can build that. The room looked at him. Not alone, he said, but I know how. I've spent 30 years in those networks. I know which shops to call and in which order and how to ask. And I know people who know other people. He glanced at Cole. We can map it. Give us 6 months and we can have something in every major market in the state. Cole nodded. 6 months, he said. We can do that. Haley looked at these 2 men at her table, one a mechanic, one a club president, both of them leaning forward now, with the particular energy of people who have found the specific task that matches their specific ability and felt something that she could only describe it as rightness, the quality of a structure that had found its load-bearing points. At 11 o'clock, she called the meeting. People gathered their things. Side conversations started, the kind that happen when a group of people have spent 3 hours building something together and don't quite want to let the momentum stop. Maya and Terrence were already exchanging contact information. Dr. Obi and Frank were talking about the clinical assessment process with the focused energy of two specialists who had just discovered each other. Patricia was not recording anything. She was just listening, which was its own kind of signal. Susan Bennett, who had been quiet through most of the meeting, came to Haley as the room began to clear. She sat down in the chair beside her daughter. Not Susan from 4 towns away, not Susan who called every day, just her mother close enough to speak quietly. "I want to tell you something," Susan said. Haley looked at her. "When you were 8 years old," her mother said, "and we were in the hospital, and the doctor had just told us what he told us. I went home that night and I sat in the kitchen, and I was so afraid," she paused. "Not just about the physical things, not just about the practical things, though I was afraid about those too. I was afraid that the world was going to make your life smaller than it was supposed to be, that you were going to have to fight every day just to take up the space you deserved to take up, and that it was going to be exhausting, and that it was going to cost you things I couldn't protect you from." Haley was very still. "And you fought every day," her mother said. "You fought the school, you fought the city council, you fought the insurance company, you fought every system that told you to wait, or be patient, or accept less." She looked at her daughter. "But this..." She glanced at the empty room, at the chairs where 11 people had just spent 3 hours building something. "This is different. This isn't fighting for yourself anymore." "No," Haley said quietly. "This is building something so the next person doesn't have to fight as hard." Susan looked at her. "That's a different kind of strength, Haley. That's the kind I didn't know you were going to find." Haley held her mother's gaze. "I didn't know either," she said honestly. "I fought it because I had to, because what happened made it impossible not to see the gap." "I know," Susan said, "but not everyone who sees the gap does something about it." She squeezed Haley's hands once firmly, the way she had done since Haley was 8 years old in a hospital bed. "I am so proud of you. I want you to know I say that not because you're my daughter. I say it because it's true." Haley looked at her mother for a long moment. "Mom," she said, "go home. It's late and the drive is long." Susan laughed, short and warm. "That's what you say instead of thank you when something actually gets to you." Haley smiled. "Drive safe." "I always drive safe." She stood, gathered her coat. At the door, she turned around one more time. "Call me tomorrow." "I always call you," Haley said. "Earlier than usual," Susan said. "I want to hear about the next steps." After she left, Haley sat alone in the conference room for a while. The chairs were still arranged the way they had been arranged for the meeting. The whiteboard had notes on it: Maya's system architecture, Frank's assessment timeline, a list in Terrence's handwriting of the insurance policy provisions they were targeting. The room had the particular quality that rooms have after something real has happened in them, not empty exactly, occupied by what had taken place. She thought about Ryan Mercer in his first night of 18 months. She had thought about him periodically over the past weeks. Not obsessively, not with anger, not anymore, but with the particular clarity that comes from having looked at something directly and understood it completely. He had stolen her wheelchair because he saw an opportunity. He had not seen her. That was the crime underneath the crime, not just the theft, but the erasure. The reduction of a person to an obstacle or a resource or simply a piece of furniture in the landscape of his decision. He had been wrong about her. He had been wrong in ways that had cost him 18 months in restitution and a record that would follow him, and in ways that had cost him something harder to quantify the moment in the courtroom, when he had looked at her and understood what he had actually done, and the understanding could not be undone. But the thing she had built on top of that wrongness was not revenge. She had never wanted revenge. What she had wanted from the moment she sat on her couch and put her face in her hands and cried, "Ed," for 7 minutes and then stopped and called Jordan, was to not let it stand, to not let it be the kind of thing that happened to a person and left them smaller than before. She was not smaller than before. She was considerably, unmistakably larger. She thought about Jake at the gas station, about Cole at the table, about Frank at 6 in the morning with a bracket that needed to be redesigned, about Jordan on the couch for 22 nights and Marcus blinking in the cold, and her mother arriving 2 minutes early because arriving late to something this important was not something Susan Bennett was capable of. She thought about the 11 people who had just sat at her table for 3 hours. She thought about the next 11, and the 11 after that. The world didn't change because everyone became perfect. She knew that. She had known it since she was 8 years old, and the world had shown her quite clearly that it was not going to arrange itself around her needs without being asked loudly and repeatedly and in writing. The world changed because someone decided to stop accepting the gap. She had decided, and the decision had attracted other decisions, the way decisions do when they're made with enough clarity and enough honesty and enough willingness to keep moving even when the borrowed chair didn't fit, and the insurance company quoted policy language, and the news segment was 37 seconds long. She reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook. She opened it to the page with the 3 words at the top. Don't let them. She had spent 5 weeks filling the pages beneath those words. Plans and contacts, in legal frameworks, in funding models, in the names of people who had said yes. 12 pages had become 30. 30 had become 46. She turned to the first blank page that remained. She wrote the date. She wrote first board meeting complete. 11 people. Maya's system is going to work. Jake knows the networks. Frank is in. Diana is in. Cole said 6 months. We can do that. She stopped. She looked at what she had written. Then she wrote one more line. Not a plan, not a next step. Just the thing that was true. The thing she wanted to have written down in her own handwriting in this specific notebook that had held her worst night and her best work. What he took from me, I turned into something he could never have imagined. She closed the notebook. She put it back in her bag. She gripped her wheels. Frank's wheels, better than before, built around her body, carrying her weight exactly as they were designed to, and she moved toward the door. In the months that followed, the Independence Access Initiative filed its nonprofit registration, secured its first round of funding from 2 sources Cole had identified, and one grant Diana found that was specifically targeted at adaptive equipment access, launched Maya's tracking system as a pilot program in partnership with 3 county sheriff's offices, and established the first 48-hour emergency lending network in the state, a system where disabled adults who had lost access to critical equipment could call a single number and have a loaner delivered within 2 days instead of waiting 6 months. In the first year, that network helped 63 people. Frank Dalton assessed equipment for 31 of them. He brought Ellie to one of the events. Ellie shook Haley's hand and held it for a second longer than a regular handshake, and neither of them said anything about 4 days, and neither of them needed to. Jake built the network he had promised in 6 months. It covered 11 counties. 12 repair shops and 7 parts dealers had formally agreed to flag suspicious equipment and report serial numbers. None of them had been asked to do it for free. Jake had simply asked them directly and specifically, and they had said yes, because that was usually what happened when the right person asked the right question, the right way. Ryan Mercer served his sentence. He completed his community service at a disability services center, which had been Diana's suggestion to the DAEA, a suggestion made not with cruelty, but with the specific belief that proximity to what you had damaged was a more meaningful consequence than distance from it. Whether it changed him in any lasting way, no one could say for certain. That was his to carry. Haley had set it down. Susan Bennett drove the hour and 40 minutes to every board meeting for the first year. Every single one. She stopped being asked if she was coming and started being assumed, which was exactly the position she preferred. And Haley Bennett, 20 years old, blonde hair. The stubbornness of someone who had been building the world she deserved since she was 12. The clarity of someone who had sat in a borrowed chair for 22 days and come out of it carrying something entirely new, continued to show up. To class, to work, to board meetings and county hearings and conversations with legislators who were slowly, incrementally starting to understand that the 30-day window was not a minor administrative detail, but a policy that made a person's independence conditional on the patience of a system that had never been dependent on a wheelchair. She was not patient with them. She was exactly as patient as the situation required, which was to say not at all. The world that had tried to make her smaller had made a serious miscalculation. Because the thing about a person who has spent their entire life building independence from the ground up, one deliberate decision at a time, is that when you take something from them, you don't diminish them. You clarify them. You burn away everything that was uncertain and leave behind exactly what they're made of, clean and defined and harder than before. Ryan Mercer had wanted an easy target. He had found the most expensive mistake of his life. And the girl he had tried to erase had written her name on something so much larger than a wheelchair that it would still be standing long after everyone in this story had forgotten his. That was the lesson everyone remembered. Not the theft, not the arrest, not the 18 months, or the restitution, or the courtroom, or the sunflower on the armrest. What they remembered was a 20-year-old woman who was handed the worst 22 days of her adult life and turned them into something that helped 63 people in the first year and would help thousands more in the years that followed. What they remembered was a man named Jake who stopped at a gas station, a man named Frank who redesigned a bracket at 6 in the morning, a man named Cole who put a piece of paper on a table and said, "This isn't about a wheelchair." What they remembered was that real strength does not announce itself. It does not wear a particular uniform, or carry a particular credential, or arrive in the form you expected. It arrives in a phone call from a stranger, in a sunflower that survived being scraped off an armrest, in 11 people at a conference table at 11 o'clock at night who lean forward at the same moment because they have found the task that matches their ability. What they remembered was this: the people who look the toughest are often the ones protecting the most vulnerable. The systems that seem immovable move when the right person decides to push. And a young woman who refused to be erased did not just get her life back. She made it into something that could not be taken from her again.